Dmitri was driving along a winding road that seemed forgotten and abandoned. The road surface was wet from a recent rain, and old, crooked signs indicated that no one had tread here for a long time. Outside the window of his old SUV, a thick fog loomed a mist in which trees resembled twisted figures, seemingly bent under the weight of their age. It was morning, but the dark clouds gathered above made it feel like the evening was approaching. He tried not to think about what he had left behind. His life was filled with losses and disappointments. His wife had left him, leaving nothing but emptiness and a wedding ring lying on the kitchen table, a silent symbol of their collapse. The job he thought was stable had closed down, and at that moment when everything was falling apart, a ghost from the past unexpectedly appeared in his life. 6 months ago, when his world was just starting to crack, he received a letter from someone he had long lost hope of ever hearing from: his brother. The letter was strange, written on tattered paper with an unfamiliar handwriting. It contained no information about where his brother had been all this time or how he had managed to find Dmitri, but the main thing was a plea for help. His brother begged him to come to a place he knew nothing about. It was far in the woods, hundreds of kilometers from the city. According to him, there was a strange hospital that didn't appear on any maps, but which the locals whispered about in hushed tones. It was called the Center for Therapeutic Treatment of Razumovsky. "You have to come as soon as possible," his brother wrote. "Time is almost up, and I won't be able to hold them back any longer. Something terrible is happening here, something you can't imagine. Come, or I will be lost forever." Dmitri pondered for a long time, but eventually decided to go. He had nothing that could hold him back at home, and nothing else made sense to him anymore except for this mystery. When he finally saw the hospital, his heart sank. Old, rusty gates, entwined with dry vines, loomed before him. The inscription on the stone arch was almost indistinguishable, but he could still make out the words "Center for Therapeutic Treatment of Razumovsky." Beyond the gates loomed the grim hospital buildings, their windows covered with dirt and dust, while the wind blew away scraps of old curtains. The place seemed completely abandoned, but something in the air, elusive, told him it was still alive. Deep within the building, a dim light flickered. Dmitri paused for a moment, hesitating to enter. But the thought of his brother pushed him forward. He pushed open the gates, which creaked sorrowfully as they opened. Ahead of him lay answers or nightmares. He crossed the deserted courtyard, overgrown with weeds, and stopped at the main entrance. The door was ajar, revealing a dimly lit corridor. Overcoming his doubts, he stepped inside. The corridor was long and narrow, its walls peeling, and the floor littered with dust and debris. Dim light spilled from old ceiling lamps, casting strange shadows that danced along the walls. Dmitri moved forward, feeling the air grow heavier with each passing moment, as if the hospital itself didn't want to let him in. After a short walk, he heard footsteps. Someone was walking toward him down the corridor. The footsteps were dull and slow, as if the sound was traveling through the thickness of time. Dmitri froze, listening intently. When a figure emerged from the shadows, he flinched. It was a tall, thin man in a white coat. His face was obscured by a medical mask, and his eyes gazed past Dmitri as if he weren't there. The man said nothing but walked past him, disappearing into the darkness of the corridor. Dmitri tried to call out to him, but his voice betrayed him, trembling, and he fell silent. Something was not right. His legs felt heavy, but he kept moving. The corridor led him to the reception desk where a nurse sat. She looked strange, like a wax doll, her skin pale and her eyes unnaturally wide. Slowly lifting her head, she looked at him and whispered, "You're late. Time has run out." Dmitri didn't understand what she meant, but her words stuck in his mind like a death sentence. He wandered through the hospital, trying to find someone who could tell him where his brother was. Along the way, he encountered patients or those who had once been patients. They sat on benches along the corridors, their bodies twisted, their faces disfigured by pain. They did not speak, only emitted soft, almost inhuman moans. At one turn, he stumbled upon a door locked but strangely ajar. Behind it lay a staircase leading down. The air was thick with the smell of dampness and decay. Dmitri felt a chill seize his body, but he could not stop. As he descended deeper, he began to feel reality around him warp. The shadows grew thicker, the walls seemed to move, and the sounds of footsteps intensified, echoing off the dungeon like walls. At the bottom of the staircase, he found a large hall resembling an operating room. But there were no doctors or nurses here, only metal tables and chains hanging from the ceiling. Dmitri slowly approached one of the tables and saw his brother lying on it. His brother's body was covered in deep scars and marks from chains. His eyes were open, but he did not move. In the dim light of the operating room, Dmitri saw that his brother's eyes were empty. He was no longer human. Suddenly, the doors of the operating room slammed shut. Figures began to emerge from the corners of the room, people, but not quite. Their faces were twisted in a grimace of pain, their bodies contorted into unnatural shapes. They moved toward Dmitri, making no sound, their empty eyes staring directly at him. He realized he had fallen into a trap. This place was not just a hospital, it was a laboratory for creating monsters, and now he had become part of this experiment. Dmitri didn't have time to understand what happened next. The last thing he heard was his brother's hoarse voice. "You came too late."